Hi everyone, Eddie Bartnick's my name. I'll be quite quick. You've probably heard enough from me already. But I did just want to welcome everybody to the IIDL track. It's a much more human-sized room, isn't it? The other room, I didn't quite realise there was another room at the back. When I went to the back, I thought, oh my goodness, just want to start by acknowledging our hosts here in the United States. Particularly, Michael, I wanted to acknowledge you for just about single-handedly pulling together all the matches and providing that wonderful foundation for the event. So Jennifer Johnson from the Administration on Community Living, were you there this morning for the opening? Yeah, cool, and for last night as well. Just wanted to acknowledge the great cooperation and input and support from you, Jennifer, to find great people for this event and for your support as well. So. And Aaron Bishop is not here. He had called away for another work commitment, but Aaron Bishop from the American Psychological Association, he hosted an amazing match and has been a great believer in this since he came to Sydney, so he sends his apologies, but he's here in spirit as well. And Emily, who was our keynote this morning, is just taking a work call. When she comes, I want to acknowledge her as well. She was pretty amazing this morning, I thought. So. And just other key IIDL people. So Lorna, where are you? Lorna down the back, okay. And Aisling, where's Aisling? Aisling's here, yep. So, hey, we're really excited about this ever-growing number of emerging leaders. We've sort of got this group that's sort of slowly getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's getting its own energy, and we're very, very excited. Now, has everybody figured out where the bathrooms are? Out the door to the right, okay. I don't think there are any other housekeeping, so I'm just going to get started. So this is the host country panel from the United States around leadership and exploring the critical issues of collective leadership and action as a means of addressing the critical issue of competitive and integrated employment for people with disabilities. So I'm going to introduce Jennifer, who's the chair of the panel, and then Jennifer will facilitate the rest of the session and introduce her panel members. So Jennifer works as the Deputy Commissioner of the Administration on Disabilities for the United States in the federal government. Jennifer holds a doctorate in special education from George Washington University, and she's worked in the Department of Health and Human Services for over a decade. So well done for surviving that long, federal government. And she began her career with the federal government in intellectual and developmental disabilities. And prior to her current position, she led the Office of Program Support for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. If you go to the app, there's a whole bunch more information about her previous positions, particularly in education and university-based. So I'll leave you to do that at your own leisure. So I did want to acknowledge your vast experience and the very important position you have in the United States, and to welcome you and your panel. And I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for that introduction. I decided to stand to make sure that I can see everybody in the room. The podium is a little bit of a barrier. I'm really delighted to be here today, and I want to thank IIDL for inviting us to be here. Today I'm here with an esteemed group of professionals who really know quite a bit about the area of employment, which we will be talking to you about. We're going to have a particular focus on individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities as it relates to the issue of competitive integrated employment. In terms of our presenters, Eddie so kindly introduced me, but we also have IIMHL with us, who is a partner at Brown, Goldstein, and Levy. Then we also have Serena Lowe, who is a colleague of mine, and is the Senior Policy Advisor in the Center for Policy and Evaluation at the Administration for Community Living. And then we have Karen Lee, who's the Executive Director for Supporting Employment, Equality, and Community, which is an organization here in the States. Before we start talking to you about the issue of employment and competitive integrated employment, I was asked to provide some background on my agency, the Administration for Community Living, or ACL. ACL is a small and what we could call a boutique agency or operating division, if we could call operating divisions within federal government boutique. But we are in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which is a very large federal agency that has oversight of many different types of health and human services programs that are delivered in all states and territories. So again, we're a very small entity within this very large department. Our mission is to maximize the independence, well-being, and health of older adults, people with disabilities across the lifespan, and their families and caregivers. As I mentioned, we're a small agency within a very large one. And the role we play within that is an advocacy role, both in and outside of government. And what we advocate for is continued expansion and coordination of home and community-based services and improvements in quality so that older adults and people with disabilities have more and better options about how and where to receive long-term services and supports. So we're a little bit of a unique federal entity in that we do have this advocacy role around community living. We fund a range of programs that support community living for older adults and individuals with disabilities. Within ACL, we have the Administration on Disabilities, or AOD, which is the part of ACL that I am with. And AOD seeks to create change to improve the lives of individuals with disabilities by moving from a country where people with disabilities live in institutions, isolation, poverty, and remain dependent on others, to a country that values the inclusion and participation of people with disabilities in all aspects of community living, where people with disabilities have careers and experience financial well-being, and are leading independent and self-determined lives. We fund a variety of programs in each state and territory that seek to equip individuals with various types of disabilities of all ages with opportunities, tools, and supports to lead lives of their choice in the community. As I mentioned, we fund a number of programs, and I'm going to go through those right now with you. At the state level, we fund 56 state councils on developmental disabilities, 56 state independent living councils, and 19 traumatic brain injury state partnerships. These entities promote active participation of individuals with varying types of disabilities in systems change activities that help to break down policy and other types of barriers to community living. At the community level, we fund 354 centers for independent living, 57 protection and advocacy systems, and what these entities do is they equip people with disabilities with the resources and supports they need to lead independent lives and also lead lives free of abuse and neglect. And we actually have a representative from our P&A program, Protection and Advocacy Program from Georgia, Ruby Moore. Glad to see you here. And then we also have connections to universities, and we actually have one of our university center directors here from Guam. So it's great to see you folks in the audience. But we have connections to 68 university centers for excellence in developmental disabilities that work to improve services through training, community capacity building, and
making sure everyone's awake.
just to make sure everything's working. And finally, we have a number of national initiatives, including the Paralysis Resource Center, the National Limb Loss Resource Center, the Self Advocacy Resource and Technical Assistance Center, the National Training Center on Dual Diagnosis, the National Aging and Transportation Center, and our National Longitudinal Studies in Developmental Disabilities. And those are just to name a few of our national activities. We have many more. The AOD programs provide each state and territory with unique resources to improve community living for individuals with various types of disabilities. And the programs often work together as a network in the state and territory to move systems forward. To us at the federal level, what they represent is a national resource on the ground level and a connection that helps us to advance change in each state and territory using multiple strategies. This overview of ACL provides a context for the discussion we want to have with you today about employment. ACL was created in 2012 based on the fundamental principle that everyone has the right to live in the community and experience all aspects of community living. They have the right to make their own choice about how and where they live their lives, and systems should support person-centered approaches. This is particularly important for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities because they are amongst the most disenfranchised populations that continue to experience abuse, neglect, and institutional living, as well as limited opportunities to be included in education classrooms and in the workforce. We, along with other partners in and outside of federal government, have been working to create more and better community living opportunities, including more and better employment opportunities for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We've made some progress in the US in that more people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are living in the community. And I'm going to show you a slide that demonstrates, by looking at the numbers, how things have changed over time and where the places where people are living. And it also shows some of the important civil rights legislation and cases that have helped to advance the movement of people from institutional settings into the community. So like I said, we've made some progress there and have moved the needle in terms of where people are living and more people living in the community. However, when we look at where people are spending their time, this slide is showing you that we've made little progress on the competitive integrated employment rates of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And while they may be in the community, more people are living in the community, fewer people are experiencing increased rates of integrated employment. There are many reasons. There has been little change on this. And today you're going to hear from experts who will talk about some of these reasons and how we are working to address those. You will hear about the important role of civil rights in these efforts, and you'll hear about some of the policy barriers and efforts to address those. And then you will hear about how those play out at the ground level. I'd like to turn it now over to Eve. Thank you.
I'm going to stand up too, because I told all my law students when I was a teacher to stand up. You project better. And you can see everybody and be intimidated by Ruby Moore being in your audience. So I'm a lawyer, and feel free to boo. But I try to use my powers for good, that powers such as they are. And in this trying to do that, I worked at the Justice Department for a few years. I'm trying to time myself too, because if I take up everybody else's time, you'll be mad. So we knew that traditionally people in the US with disabilities were sent to institutions, residential institutions. They spent their days and their nights there. And those also included employment-related institutions, which are called sheltered workshops in the US. And those places purported to specialize in serving them. And they purported to provide ways for them to interact with people without disabilities by mostly bringing people with disabilities in to say hi. However, it became clear over time that these government and charity-funded institutions were too often not really specializing in either caring for people with disabilities or preparing them to return to mainstream society. Once you went in, you stayed there forever and ever and ever. Instead, they were warehousing people. They were preparing them only for continued institutionalization. They were exploiting their work for financial gain, and they were keeping mainstream society from even noticing that people with disabilities exist and including them and thinking about them and incorporating them into communities, and they were abusing them. So one of the laws that the Justice Department enforced was the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act. And under that law, DOJ would go in and look at the institutions and look for whether there were unconstitutional abuses going on, unconstitutional treatment of people with disabilities in institutions. But eventually, we went in and thought, why is this person here? It turns out there's nothing magical about an institution. It's the same services you provide in the community. It's just all located in one place, which seems like mostly a convenience for the provider. We can have everybody come to one place and we get to buy a building. So but it was also a chicken and egg issue. So as more people stayed in the community, less community-based services to provide to them were available. As more people stayed in institutions, less community-based services were available for them in the community, and more specialty services stayed in the institutions. Those are the only places you could work if you were a specialist. We thought, wonder if we reverse that. If more people lived in the community, would more services be available to them in the community? And thought, why not? So the only arguably legitimate reason to provide services in an institution, we thought, was to limit costs by providing the same high-cost, low-quality services to a bunch of people at one time, instead of providing individual services to each person wherever they were. And our investigations then revealed, well, that's not even true. It's not cost-effective. It's more expensive to serve people in institutions than it is in the community. And though many of the services that people were getting weren't disability specific. You could go get your feet treated pretty much at any foot doctor. It's just that the mainstream providers were like, you're a person with a disability, you have to go over there. And that's discrimination. So Title II of the ADA says, discrimination, bad. In fact, you can't do discrimination anymore. It said that both for the providers in the community and for the public entities that were putting people with disabilities in institutions. Stop looking at me. So the integration regulation of the ADA puts these concepts into a civil rights framework. Now, we in the U.S. are very, we see civil rights as a very powerful tool. So we thought, let's use that. The ADA specifically provides an integration regulation that says state and local entities, governments have to provide their services in the most integrated setting appropriate for the person with a disability. Not the one most convenient for you, not the one most convenient for the provider, the one most appropriate for the person with a disability. And the most integrated setting is one where people with disabilities interact with people without disabilities. Pretty simple. So then the ADA is in 1990. Not until 1999 does the Supreme Court get around to saying in Olmstead versus LC, yeah, the ADA meant what that said. It's discrimination to unnecessarily segregate people in institutional settings. As long as the services in the community are appropriate, the affected person isn't opposed to getting those services in the community, and in a nod to budget considerations, as long as the community-based treatment can be reasonably accommodated without sucking all the resources away from other people with disabilities. So disability rights advocates in the United States, along with the Department of Justice, where I worked for a period, began a little late in 2009. The advocates started earlier. The Justice Department, slow, began to prioritize Olmstead integration enforcement. And the light bulb went on. Why focus our energy on making institutions better places or less unconstitutional places? Let's focus on getting states to provide effective community-based services in the world. And over the next 8 years alone, the department's cases helped over 50,000 people get out of institutions and get services in their community. So these cases challenge states' over-reliance on residential institutions like psychiatric hospitals and DD centers and nursing homes. And importantly, they didn't just say, get people out of these institutions or don't let them in anymore. They said, provide services in the community. So those cases focused on that part of the regulation that says you will serve people in the setting that is most integrated, not you will not put them in institutions. So you can't just boot them out and say, see ya, good luck. That's an affirmative obligation. So the case is focused on requiring government not just to close the doors to the institutions, not just to kick people out, but to provide services that people needed in their community, and people moved out. Into their own homes, into group homes, into smaller settings, into more individualized settings. And then we thought, wait a minute. It's not just about where you sleep at night. It's about what you do during the day. Does the integration mandate not apply to that? It does. So it's about where you live. So great, I'm at home asleep when everybody else is at home asleep. Boy, do I feel integrated. And then the next morning, the bus picks me up and takes me to the sheltered workshop, and I spend my whole day there. Not feeling so integrated. And what do most people do when they're awake? Well, if you're like me, if I'm awake, I'm working. And people with disabilities were working when they were awake too. They were just working in institutions. And so we decided to move the integration mandate enforcement into the employment-related institutions, the sheltered workshops. And those workshops, it turned out, weren't really preparing people to move into the community. Governments hadn't focused on providing community services in the community to support people in employment. The same person who could support you in a sheltered workshop could get in a car and go with you to your job in the community and provide those services there. But no. We have this building. We don't want to give up the building. And we also found, and this is being litigated now, that people with disabilities in those workshops weren't even being accommodated. The reasonable accommodations that the ADA requires of all employers weren't being provided in sheltered workshops because they thought, oh, we're not their employer, we're a charity. We accommodated them by letting them have the job. That's where our job ended. No. So a bunch of cases started channeling these systems that funneled people directly into sheltered workshops, either from school or as soon as they developed a disability. What's my time? Stop that. So we went into Rhode Island and found that the state and the school district in Providence were having students do sheltered workshop work under contract for the local sheltered workshop for parts of the day in school. What were we preparing them for? Guess what? You are so qualified to go work for a sheltered workshop. And so they did. And so we filed a lawsuit and reached a settlement agreement or consent decree with the whole state of Rhode Island to say, you're not going to do that anymore. And in fact, you're going to go back and find the people who you shuffled into sheltered workshops, and you're going to let them out, and you're going to give them supported employment services in the community. And that's still going on right now, but it's working really well. And then we said, okay, that worked. Oregon, what are you doing? And we went to Oregon and sued the state of Oregon along with private counsel. And hundreds of youth with intellectual disabilities were leaving school and going straight into sheltered workshops. Why? They were doing that kind of job while they were in school. And most of these people were being paid below minimum wage, no wage at all in school, and then below minimum wage in the sheltered workshops. So they were prepared for a life of nothing but public benefits, no ability to get promoted, no ability to improve their skills, no ability to have a middle-class life, or even a lower-income life. So, and then we went on and issued guidance. I loved that guidance. That guidance has been rescinded. But it's still the law, and you can find it on my website. So it's still there. So these cases applying disability rights integration mandate to employment services pushed states to support people with disabilities in competitive integrated employment. What are the jobs available in your community? What do my people like to do? What are they good at? And we will support you there. Your job coach can go anywhere. Your technology accommodations can go anywhere. So I always say, all the lawyers and judges in the world can't actually get a person a job. So we set this precedent. The precedent is out there and operating in the world. But that then led to the federal government and state governments rethinking, how are we supporting people with disabilities? And that's the policy piece that Serena's going to talk about that she really made happen. So we're talking about employment. Why are we talking about employment? Because I've been fighting for civil rights for too long to mention. And all those other civil rights depend on employment, at least to some extent. Our jobs are one of the most important aspects of our lives, at least mine is. We spend a lot of time there, and they make it possible for us to get married and have children and buy a home or live in a home, pay the rent. support our families, contribute to our communities, volunteer, all the things we want the rights to do to be involved in our communities. Having a job makes those possible. Sometimes having a job interferes with them, as in my life, where you spend all your waking time working. And a huge percentage of us meet our spouses at the job. So we're losing something by not having one. So equal opportunity, well, maybe. So equal opportunity and all the other aspects of life really largely depend on making some money, achieving some skills, feeling you're valued in your job. And the community inclusion and visibility of people with disabilities in the world that happens from civil rights implementation depends on having a job, on being where people are, other people are when they're awake. And that community inclusion and visibility of people with disabilities has an impact on attitudes. Young people today, I swear to God, think differently about people with disabilities than they did just 10 years ago. Young people today notice when people with disabilities are missing from their workplace, from their school, from their community center, from their bowling league. They notice. And that's really important. And that comes from people with disabilities being in their workplaces and being in their schools and integrated in with them. And that didn't just happen because people are in the community when we're asleep. It happened because people in the community are here when we're awake and working together. So I'm going to turn it over to Serena now to talk about how the policy changed in support of that civil right. I think you're 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. One of the worst parts of my work here is going after someone like Eve. She was being really humble during her time at our U.S. Department of Justice when she was there during the Obama administration. That division was responsible for 50 or more, I think, over 50 Olmstead settlements and cases across our country. And so really just want to give her a round of applause because it's really... Which leads me to policy. If we didn't have a really strong federal civil rights framework, it would be very difficult for people like me. And when I say people like me, I mean we're like on the bottom of, like, we're like the catfish on the river. If lawyers are here, we're here because we're bureaucrats. I like to refer to myself as an avocrat because I am a very committed advocate to people with disabilities, but I happen to choose to live and work, and sometimes live inside the belly of the beast, as we call it. So anyway, but if we didn't have that civil rights framework, we would really be up a creek in the United States. Particularly right now, we are not able to really move policy forward unless we have laws that really substantiate and build a case for why we need to be thinking outside the box and evolving our programs and our federally funded services and activities. There are kind of three key themes that frame our federal policy. I'm going to talk a little bit about those. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the federal-state relationship, which is a huge part of our Constitution here in the United States, and that's something we should talk about because it has a lot of implications on disability employment throughout the country. Talk about some major ongoing policy challenges that continue to be real barriers to our progress in this country, and then talk about kind of moving forward where some of our opportunities are. And I'm going to do all that in about 10 minutes, so make it quick. So in our country, and I'm sure in several around the room, our policy is predicated on statutory authority from our Congress, from funding, the types of funding that we get to enact our programs and required activities, and then the law. Eve talked about the law. What we attempt to do in a public policy arena with respect to disability employment is to frame our work around investing in research that will really help identify ongoing barriers to employment and access to economic mainstream, not only only for people with disabilities, but other people who have multiple barriers to those things in society. The testing, validation, and dissemination of evidence-based practices. I'm using the term evidence-based practices because I think that's still the internationally recognized, but we have tended to go on to promising practices in the U.S. I guess because if it fails somewhere, then we can say it's just promising. It doesn't always work everywhere. So we put a lot of money into that and into providing technical assistance then to states, to providers of disability employment services, et cetera. And when I say a lot of money, I mean a lot of our discretionary dollars across the board. And because of that, we feel very proud in some of the evidence-based practices that have really evolved over the years around. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear better now? Okay. Only one person said that, which means I know the rest of you are just tuning me out. Thanks so much. Okay. Where was I? Oh, yes. So some of our evidence-based practices that we've really invested heavily in and very intentionally in as a country over the last 10, 20 years related to customized employment. So really looking at it from a demand side, like what an individual employer needs. What are some of those gaps in terms of, things that aren't getting done because maybe certain employees have too many tasks. And so being able to pull those tasks out for an employer, identify those gaps in efficiency, and then identify people who would be good and have the right skill set and interest to take advantage of those. Okay, so that's customized employment. We're very proud of that. Supported employment, really using job developers, job coaches, on-site supports to help a person not only secure employment, but sustain and grow in employment. We have a spinoff on that just specifically for people with mental health issues who may have a career or professional goals, but because of their episodic symptoms, may have to pull out for a while and then come back into the workforce. We all know how difficult and challenging that can be for folks. So we're very proud of that work. Universal design's another one. I know many of your countries invested in those things too. Program and service delivery is the other thing then that I would call the big cash wagon. And this is why Eve's work at the Department of Justice with she and her colleagues was so very important. We were spending upwards of $2 billion a year doing what I like to call warehousing people with disabilities during the day. So we got on the deinstitutionalization bandwagon, although there are many institutions still out there in this country today. But as we started pulling people into family homes, into group homes, into intentional settings, we really discounted the importance of investing in how they spend their days. And so warehousing has become the big thing. And when I say warehousing, I mean this. States get money from our Medicaid system, from workforce investment, et cetera, to support people. It's easier to just do these big contracts, right? With like a large entity that can take on maybe 300 people in the day and put them all there and make sure they're safe and get them some widget work to do, right? It's much easier to do that in the short term than it is to actually look at people at an individualized basis, identify what their strengths are, what their interests are, what their natural supports are, and from there help them put together an employment pathway. But I will tell you, on the back end, it's much worth of investment to do it that way up front. I see some people nodding their heads. We spend over $380 billion a year on people with disabilities in this country, and most of that is on the back end. Medical expenses, long-term care, institutionalization costs. We spend 2%, less than 2% of that is on educating people with disabilities, helping them in apprenticeships in the workforce development sector, helping them get a job and secure a job. So that's not something that we're proud of. I know, Americans, we like to brag. There's no bragging rights here. That's pretty shameful. And it is something that we in the policy arena only have so much control over. But the best thing that we can do is really try to identify the things that are working and see what we can do to help magnify those things, bring them to scale, and sustain them over time. Just a quick check. Okay. Doing pretty good here. Okay, so federal and state partnership. So we have a huge respect for state rights in this country, which means we are not a centralized government. We have federal policies and regulations that states must follow, but they tend to get a lot of flexibility in how they follow those. Sometimes that's a good thing, meaning it allows states to spur innovation, to pilot test new things and new strategies at a much quicker pace than we could at a federal level. And that's all really good. The challenges are we don't have consistent data collection going on across the board with any of our systems. Even when we require it, it's not consistent. We have very low parameters of accountability and enforcement. So we might have a regulation out there. I work on a regulation that's very important. It's about making sure that all Medicaid-funded home and community-based services and the settings that they're provided in this country for people with disabilities have a very general criteria, right? That no matter where you go, if you're in Kansas or Kentucky or New York, you have access to certain rights, things like access to competitive integrated employment, access to control over personal resources, access to determining choice of provider and the services and who provides them. But I can tell you that being on the compliance side of things has been very difficult because just how far we're allowed to go to really call out states and settings that aren't complying by that is pretty limited and pretty minimal. So those are some of the challenges that we have. There are also some ongoing major policy challenges that are archaic in this country and that I believe is what is at the crux of why we spend so much of our money, billions and billions of dollars, on the back end than on investing people in the front end. We have this very old legislation called the Social Security Act. Some of you call it disability insurance in your countries or something else. For us, it's Social Security. It says very clearly in there, and this has not been updated since when I was, well before I was the spit in my father's eye, there is a language in there that basically says to get access to Social Security based on disability, you have to prove that you're unable to work. So we spend all this money right now in discretionary dollars trying to get people to work, right? We want them to work, to live, to thrive in their community, to achieve optimal socioeconomic advancement. But we've got this statute that says you're not going to get any supplemental income, and you also have income and asset limits connected to your long-term support services, long-term care, health care that you only get through Medicaid. And so you're kind of screwed. Is that I don't know. What did you guys use out there? Well, yeah, I didn't say, the other word. But you're kind of screwed, if you're a person with disability and you're trying to do the best you can, but you really rely on that supplemental, income and those benefits to make you come into it. So we've got this cyclical issue that we have not actually addressed in 100 Congresses. And that is going to continue to play out in a very bad way. We also have an institutional bias in that same Social Security Act that says states are held accountable for anyone who has nursing level home of care, institutional level care. They have to pay for a placement in an institution or nursing home. But we do not, it's my turn to stop now. We do not, however, have that same mandate or requirement for having people out in the community. Those are all what we call optional services that a state can decide to provide based on their state budget, based on a number of other things. They don't have to. And because they don't have to, that institutional bias is why we're spending so much money again housing someone in an ICF, IID, intermediate care facility is what they're called in this country, or a nursing home at upward of $130,000 a year per person, instead of having them out working in the community, living in their own home with people they choose for somewhere around $75,000 to $80,000 a year. So these are all important questions. I'm not saying don't look at us as an example, but learn from some of our barriers, our mistakes, and also some of our strategies and opportunities along the way. On that, thank you very much for having me here. I want to just introduce Karen really quick, because what's exciting we intentionally put it this way. We always like to put a positive spin on everything. But one of the greatest things about service provision in this country is when we see community-based organization providers trying to do the right thing, even when federal and state policy doesn't incentivize them and sometimes discourages them from doing this. Karen is an executive director of a community-based organization in Maryland that actually supports people to live in the same communities that we all live in, to work, to thrive, to participate socially, recreate, etc., and to be fully included, which is, I think, a step up, as Eve noted, from integration. Integration is forcing it. Inclusion is just letting it happen naturally because you're individualizing the supports people need to do it. So now you get to hear the really good news from Karen.
Thanks, Serena. So I will tell you just a short story. And I do want to let you know that I did offer to do this panel in Australia, and they said no, we had to stay in DC. But maybe next time we could, New Zealand, anywhere. So when we were working on leaving these center-based supports that we were talking about, the state of Maryland said, what are you going to do about your building? And I said, well, we're not going to have a building. And they said, well, you need a building. And I said, well, show me in the regulations where it says I need a building. It says I need this many toilet stalls in the building, but it doesn't say I need the building. And one of the partners in your law firm, I don't know if you heard this, one of the partners in your law firm actually had to go to get an order from the Attorney General of Maryland to try to get us to go into the community. I mean, amazing. Like they were fighting us to help people to live, work, and thrive in the community. So anyway, welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Karen Lee, and I work on the local level as an executive director, and I also work with providers all around the country to help them to make some of this transformation, and I work with states. And hello to Dee, who we work with in Kentucky. So great to see you here. So it's interesting that I think that one of the things that all three of these ladies said is, I don't know if people are TED Talk people, you watch Brene Brown. She's kind of everywhere these days. See, everybody loves her. And Maya Angelou, they talk about belonging, and that's really what this is about, right? It's about belonging. And that means that there's things that we have to do to help people belong. The other thing I think is they did such a great introduction for me because they talked about what happens on the macro level. They talked about the policy. They talked about kind of the bigger pictures and about how how that comes down. And it is a different service. You know, the complexity of service that we're talking about calls for a very different kind of leadership than the complexity of providing institutional leadership, right? So in our new leadership, we really need leaders that can collaborate. They can collaborate inside of our field, but also outside. They can collaborate with technology and housing and departments of parks and recreation. They need to be able to collaborate. We need inputs from our advocates, families, policy advocates, people we support. They need to tell us what a good life looks like. Because what we've said earlier today is so true, is that people really want three things. And it's no different than what anybody else is. And by the way, we don't spend $23 billion or $320 billion on this, but we have spent millions of dollars on this. Let's do a survey and find out what people with disabilities want in their life. We can continue to spend that money on asking, or we can do it. And the three things we hear is, I want a home of my own, with somebody I choose to live with. I want a job. I want a place to work. I think Jennifer said this. I want a place to work where I can contribute. And I want to belong with others. I want people in my life that aren't paid to be there. People I want. They want those three things. And you all have these nice, lovely lanyards, and they all say Anthem on it. And here's the secret. Anthem has figured this out. They have figured out that when people get those three things in their life, their medical expenses are cheaper. They have figured out, big data has told us that when people have those three things in their lives, everything is better. And so that's what we're really focused on, is how do we get those three things. So the policy piece is the next thing that we really talked about. So in the United States, my experience has been that we really have to have this collaboration. We need to have this advocacy, the words from our advocates about what it is that they want. We also need the policy piece. And the last thing we need is the research. We need the research to come together to help to bring it all together to tell us how to do it. And we have so much research available to us, and many of the countries here have research that I have looked at your research as well. And we have research about how to help a third grader ask to play kickball on the playground at recess. And we have research about how to help a large system transform. So it's already there. That information is already there. How do we put those three things together on a daily basis for people? And the way that we do that at Seek is we do it with 4 very basic things. The first is partnerships. We do it with partnerships. I have this up here too if people want to take some. We do that through our reciprocal partnerships, not charity partnerships, but it has to be reciprocal. It's critical that partnerships are critical. Who stayed in this hotel last night? Okay. Did your TV work? Did anybody try the TV channel changer? So if you tried the TV last night and it worked, you can thank Montaz for that, because he is an intern in the engineering department at this hotel. And he is somebody who we support through our project search here with the Hilton. We're in all the local Hiltons. And we have internship sites for young adults who have who experience disability. And Montaz is here, and he's right now changing the batteries in all of the clickers in your room, and he's setting your temperature gauge. He's an intern for 13 weeks. That's a partnership. Hilton has a high turnover. It's just a reality in this industry. It's a very high turnover. So we are providing a pipeline for them of people who can do these jobs and want to do these jobs by they start off as interns and then get jobs. The other thing is, if you slept on your bed last night and your sheets were nice and cozy, you can thank Jeremiah. Because Jeremiah is working down in the laundry department, and he is helping. He actually is a porter, so he's going up and getting your sheets and bringing them down. That's a partnership that we have. So we have partners with landlords. We have partners with recreation centers. We have partnerships, but they're reciprocal. They're reciprocal. It's not a one-sided partnership. The next thing we have is a workforce. We have a workforce crisis in this country right now. Our direct support professionals are high turnover, low paid, not a lot of value. And most of them are changing industry. So they worked in those institutions. They worked in those separate places. And that's the skill that they have. We need to retrain an entire workforce. So the guys that work in this hotel, they carry an iPad with them. On that iPad is an incredibly sophisticated program called Work Autonomy, and it's a $900 app. We get 2 licenses per app. Huh? Yeah. And they carry that with them. And when they're out working, the person who's supporting them is at the Embassy Suites, Capitol Hill, and they're checking to see what their productivity is all day long. Because I can't afford to have somebody sitting with them all day, we've got somebody who's looking, because every time they do a task, they're pushing a button. That's a collaboration. That's a partnership. That's reciprocal. But I needed to retrain my staff to be able to do something like that. That's a different skill than sitting in a segregated place telling people to do things differently. We need planning and navigation. We need a better way of asking people how they want their lives to look. And then we need to be able to honor that and help them to navigate all the systems, not just the disability system, but every system that's out there. They need to know how to navigate Parks and Rec. How do I sign up for that? How do I take a class at the community college? How do I get on the list to try to get some lower income housing? How do I stand for 32 hours at it straight in a Social Security office to figure out how to get my benefits fixed, right? So we need that. We also need fiscal diversity. As a provider, I am responsible for providing supports to folks with more than just the resources that our healthcare system can give us, more than just the resources that we can get from Medicaid. What are the other partnerships and fiscal diversity opportunities that are out there? How do we get other resources? Are we using our community rec centers? Are we using our reciprocal relationships? This morning we had a business advisory council meeting up in Rockville, which is about 20 miles north of here, and we were accessing our business partners because they're going to help us to interview people, to do mock interviews, right? So we're not paying a staff person of ours to do the mock interviews. We're using businesses in the community who want to support us. So we need, through fiscal diversity, we need to be able to look at other ways of bringing in funds. So I think I'm probably close on time. Do you want me to keep going? Okay. So I think that as I said, I think it's a brand new kind of leadership. I think we need to look within ourselves. One of the things that happens in change, so if your organization is providing one kind of service, and you need to change to another kind of service or change somehow, you have to be thoughtful that the amount of time it takes to go through change is very difficult. You really have a philosophical change, and that's one of the things that's happened in the United States, is that we're on a trajectory of philosophical change. So the question is always, did policy lead us there? Did advocates lead us there? Or did research lead us there? And I'd like to suggest that it's when it all comes together. It's the perfect storm when all those things come together to make a change. And we are at that precipice in the United States with our current policies, with our litigation, with the way that we're funding things. Research, certainly not just in the United States, but across the country or across the world. And then advocates, the voices of self-advocates. So how long ago was it just the parent who said, please open this sheltered workshop so I don't have to send my kid to the institution? And now parents are saying, please make sure that my kid has somebody sit next to them in the lunchroom because they're at lunch, right? They're in the regular schools doing that. Or please help my son or daughter when they need some support at their work. And so those kinds of partnerships and bringing those big three things together, advocacy, research, and policy, are what really have made the catastrophic change in the United States. So, thank you.
So, wow, I want to thank our panelists. I think they did an amazing job of giving you some insights into employment in the U.S. and how we're trying to work towards greater opportunities for competitive integrated employment in the U.S. I saw a lot of nodding heads in the room, which makes me think that you're experiencing some of the same things in your country. But again, hopefully you got some insights as to how we're trying to address those here in the U.S. I think we can all relate to some of the ideas that we've talked about in terms of, I think you said it well, Karen, belonging, the sense of belonging, and the important role that employment plays in the sense of belonging that people have. And again, how we're working towards achieving that here in the U.S. So I know we have, we're close to the end of time, but time for questions? And there's another mic here. Do we want to use that in the room? No questions? You all have it figured out? Maybe you can tell us how to do it. Oh, gosh. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Maria from New Zealand. I have a question about individualization. What do you see working in terms of individualizing, getting people on an employment pathway, and how do you square that with the limitations around funding and needing to scale?
Well, how did you get your job? How did you get your job?
Personal networks.
Personal networks, right. That's it. Really, that's it, right? When people belong, they have networks. And what we find is that most of the people, young people that we support that are looking for jobs, they don't even know they have personal networks, but they do have personal networks. And so giving them some opportunities to express that. So there's some planning tools. Serena talked about this customized employment, and a really big part of that customized employment is getting to know who's in your circle, who's in your life, and who's around you. And we can't go to parents and say, who do you know that owns a business? And that's kind of the old way of doing it. We have to get into people's lives one at a time, spend some time with them, maybe bring some of that up to the top, have lots of conversations. It's about being present with people to get to know them. Well, he goes to the grocery store with his mom every Thursday. Can I come watch you at the grocery store? And you come watch him at the grocery store, and we see that every single person there says, hey, Joe, how are you? What's going on, Joe? What's going on? It's about helping people to identify their personal networks.
I would just say very quickly from a policy standpoint, individualization is hard. It's hard to help policymakers understand who are kind of on these 2-year budgetary cycles that upfront costs, spending a little bit more upfront actually yields lots of long-term savings down the road. But some of the ways that we've seen states handle that is by meeting people where they're at. So instead of having just 1 or 2 services related to employment, maybe having 13 or 14 that are on different spectrums of developing a career pathway, you know, based on what someone's interested in, and moving kind of up the scale to support them throughout the lifespan in terms of their employment goals. So that's another way we've seen individualization coming together from a policy standpoint.
And I have a little bit to add about this, just because I just spoke about this the other day to vocational rehabilitation professionals. And it really is the same things that we use to get our kids jobs are the things we use to get people with disabilities jobs. But the kids with disabilities, or adults with disabilities, like I said, in the US have been institutionalized for so long, they don't have networks. And so, like, when I was 16, I said, oh my God, I need a job for the summer. And I told my dad, my stepdad, and a teacher. And I got 3 jobs. And they used their networks. But that's why we here have vocational rehabilitation professionals and others who do job development, job finding, job connecting. And the best ones use their own networks and everybody's networks that they know. And then the other piece about individualization is discovery. So when I was 16, my dad used discovery on me. He didn't know this. He said, okay, what kind of job do you want? I said, I don't know. What kind of jobs are there? He said, okay, what do you like to do? And I said, read. And he said, oh God. Because the reading job, I'm still looking for it. And he said, all right, what are you reading? And I said, Shakespeare. Do you like it? Yeah. And he got me a job at a Shakespeare theater company in the costume department. And that's discovery. We find out what you like and what you're good at. Of course, I didn't know how to sew, so a little problem with the discovery. But these are the same tools. We got fancy evidence-based names for them, but a lot of it is the same stuff.
I think the only thing I would add is one of the things that we didn't talk about in this panel, which is another issue in terms of working towards greater opportunities for employment, is our education system. And how is the education system starting early and talking with kids about careers, regardless of whether you have a disability or not. And we haven't explored that as much, but we sometimes do talk about, you know, the role of the talking early on with kids about what career do you want to have, instead of assuming that they're not going to have a career early on in their childhood. So I think that's just another thing to think about, is the role of education, which again we didn't really spend too much time, or we didn't talk about at all. So yes. We've got one over here. Oh, okay. Sorry, we can't see you over there.
Hi there. David's my name. I represent an organisation that supports people with disabilities to get a job and keep a job. Firstly, thank you for sharing your insights and all that valuable information. Thank you. I'm interested, one of the commentators said that there's a limit to what you can do in terms of policy. I'm wondering whether or not You can share information about how people with disabilities get to the point where they're actually influencing policy by becoming politicians, and what needs to happen to elevate people into those roles.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because access was something I didn't get time to. I ran out of time, but is a challenge that we have. We roughly actually have about 70% of people with IDD and mental health issues in this country that get no supports from the government because they're on waiting lists, or they don't even know what's available to them, what they're eligible for. And so we have a huge divide of disproportionate representation in our government. I was going to bring up access from a different standpoint, which is that with self-advocates, we have a real problem in America called token engagement, where we use the same 5 or 6 in each state to vocalize the needs of all people with disabilities, instead of actually filling the room with people with disabilities and having only 1 or 2 policymakers doing the listening. We don't do that very well in this country. The self-advocacy movement has been like the linchpin for the civil rights movement, but I worry that it has really deteriorated over the years in the public policy domain. I think the best thing is that people need to be encouraged to run, and I would say, and Jennifer can speak to this a little bit more. ACL does fund some voting projects to getting people with disabilities out, knowing about their voting rights and getting them out to vote. We also need to be creating opportunities to help them develop a campaign and to learn what it would mean to run for office. Because I think until we have more people with disabilities in leadership positions, we're going to continue to struggle with this kind of token engagement. And just not to get on my soapbox, but another thing that we struggle with, and that frankly I was a little disappointed when I came here to an international meeting, is that we never have a lot of cultural diversity in these conversations. It's a lot of people that kind of look like me, as you can see, and as you can see around you. And that's a real problem that apparently even internationally we need to contend with. So just putting it out there.
Can I say one thing? Yeah. The other thing is I want to stand up so I can see you. One of the things that we do, peer engagement and peer policy advocacy, is really, really important. And we, as a society or as governments, tend to think that should be your volunteer activity. Well, I don't have another job as a person with a disability. I got to pay bills, and Social Security ain't going to cut it. But you're getting free advice from me. So people who are acting as peers should be paid for their work. People who are consulting with the government about what policy should be from their own experience and the experience of the people they know that the government doesn't know should be paid for their work. And the other thing is, we need to support grassroots self-advocacy organizations. And we have had success in the country when we did that. The National Council on Independent Living gets some government work, government funding. And part of that is to develop and focus grassroots work on policy issues. And that's really important. If we want the information from people who with the lived experience, that doesn't come free. You don't get my lived experience without you, at least inviting me to show up somewhere. New Zealand would be great. So these are valuable contributions that people with disabilities are making to help governments and employers and so forth comply with the law and carry out their organizations, and they're consultants.
I just wanted to add one other thing, and I'm going to stand too so I can see everyone. I mentioned earlier some of the programs that we fund, and under some of those programs, they have a specific responsibility to develop the leadership skills of people with lived experiences. So we have what are called state councils on developmental disabilities. And again, they have a specific responsibility to do that. And they have done that in every state and territory. And we do have examples of people who have been either trained or participated on a state council who have then later run for state government positions and have been elected into office, and in other ways in which they have led leadership roles in the state. But it's something that we continue to work on, as Serena noted. We need to make sure that we're always authentically engaging with people and building their leadership skills. And one of the projects that we fund is a national self-advocacy resource and technical assistance center to do that on top of what our grantees are doing in the states. And I also, because we have our protection and advocacy program in the room and our university center, they also play important roles in the leadership development as well, and want to acknowledge that work as well. So there were some other questions. Yeah, no, yeah, we're out of time. Sorry, we're out of time.
Thank you. Just to maybe just wind up a little bit, a very short period of time, and you took us on quite a journey from the national sort of architecture. And I think a lot of people come to the States and struggle with how things are organised and how many layers. And so right through to, policy, and then the person-by-person values and methodology being really practical, and then into the politics of change, and then back into self-advocacy. So we could have just kept on going and going. So I just want to thank you on behalf of all of us. So Jennifer, Eve, Serena, and Karen. Yeah, and we've got a small gift for you in a moment, okay? So thank you. Just remind people it's own arrangements for lunch, and then back at 2 o'clock, we've got our big leadership session starting at 2 o'clock. Thank you.